Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Accidental Salvation of Gracie Lee by Talya Tate Boerner. Narrated by Eldridge. Chapter 1. Daddy was in a bad mood. I could tell by the slow, drawn-out crunch of gravel on the driveway. He'd parked by the old plum tree and was taking forever to walk through the back door. He was predictable, just like my life so far. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. The truck engine fell quiet, leaving only the sound of tree frogs. Lucky's ears perked. I rubbed the white spot on the back of his neck, and he relaxed back onto the floor beside me. 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi. Tucking Barbie underneath the throw pillow on my lap, I traced my finger over the red blooms that covered my library book. Abby, my little sister, lay dozing on the opposite end of the couch, sprawled flat on her back. She had a way of sleeping through anything, a loud television show, or even one of Mom and Daddy's late-night arguments. As I watched, her long eyelashes fluttered just slightly. Then she giggled in her sleep, rolled over onto her belly, and continued snoozing. 7 Mississippi, 8 Mississippi. Slipping my hands under the pillow, I twirled Barbie's silky hair and stroked the bumpy fabric of her pin-dot skirt. Mama sewed most all of Barbie's clothes from scrap material, and sometimes we even dressed alike. Barbie and me, not Mama and me. 9 Mississippi, 10 Mississippi. I stared at the back door for a good long time. What was Daddy doing? Resting? Thinking? Deciding whether or not to turn around and leave for good? 12 Mississippi. From my spot on the couch, I listened to the nightly sounds of our house, as familiar as the hymns we sang every Sunday morning at Boone Chapel. The crack of the ice tray, the opening of the silverware drawer with its ear-splitting creak. As Mama reheated Daddy's supper, the smell of fried potatoes and salt pork filled the air. Abby and I had eaten hours ago. When Daddy worked extra late, Mama didn't make us wait to eat. Those were the best nights, especially when she let us eat hot dogs and macaroni and cheese in front of the television. The screen door slapped shut, its echo vibrating through our house and inside my head. I jolted, even though I had expected the rattle. 15 Mississippi. Daddy tossed his grimy thermos and a stack of ledger papers on the side table near his favorite recliner, and then wiped his brow with a handkerchief he pulled from his back pocket. When he nodded and grunted in my direction, I half smiled back and reminded myself to breathe. As though allowed only so many syllables per day, Daddy made sure not to use too many at once. His bronzed face and creased forehead made him appear older than some of my friends' fathers, but I realized that wasn't the case. When I grew up, I was not going to be a farmer. This much I knew. Daddy disappeared into the kitchen. He grumbled about something, his words low and dull. I was unable to make them out. Mama answered, sounding cheerful, but in a forced way. Mama had the hardest job of all. Eventually, after Daddy vanished into the bathroom, Mama swept the kitchen floor. That was always her last chore before everything repeated in the morning. I considered it curious, the amount of filth and food and odd things that ended up in the dustpan after supper. 1 day's worth of leftover life tossed into the trash. "Gracie, time for bed," Mama called out to me from the kitchen. Tugging Barbie from beneath the pillow, I smoothed her hair and poked my still sleeping sister with Barbie's feet, frozen in tiptoe position. "Let's go to bed, Abby," I said. She rubbed her eyes, muttered okay, and followed me through the kitchen and along the hallway into our bedroom, dragging her feet without fully waking up. Abby changed into her nightgown and tumbled into bed without saying a word. Tomorrow, she wouldn't remember how she had gotten there. No matter how tired I was, I refused to go to bed without first brushing my teeth. No way. Not since Mrs. Barnes, the school nurse, took all the girls into the home economics room for a special health class and made us chew tablets that dyed our teeth bright red. When my best friend, Janice, saw her flaming scarlet gums in the bathroom mirror, she started crying. I clasped my hand over my mouth, certain I'd soon be wearing false teeth like Papa Pete. Later on the playground, Bubba, who is my friend even though he's a boy, told me that Coach Green forced the boys to chew the same red tablets. Their lesson was in the gym. Bubba told me not to worry.
The dye comes off. Mama makes me chew those things once a month.
Bubba knew a lot about health sort of things because Mrs. Barnes was his mother. I squirted a length of toothpaste on my brush, trying to make it curl on the end, like the pictures in Mama's magazines. It never did. While I brushed, I sang all the words to the Star-Spangled Banner in my head, a little trick I taught myself to make sure I brushed long enough. I stared at myself through toothpaste splatters that dotted the mirror. My aunts and uncles always said I looked just like Mama. I couldn't see it, except maybe in the shape of my face, which was thin like hers, but certainly not in my eyes. Mama had movie star eyes. That's how Daddy described them. Because hers were an unusual blue color that changed from icy to slate, depending upon the color shirt she wore or the mood she was in. My eyes were the same uninteresting color as Daddy's, hazel. With 64 shades in the largest crayon box, not a single one was named Hazel. Hazel was a non-color. Although the weather had not turned hot yet, the freckles across my cheeks had begun to darken and multiply, and my wavy brown hair, normally a drab shade during winter, had brightened. Mama said women would pay good money for natural blonde highlights like mine, but she never said any such thing about my freckles, or my hazel eyes. My sister and I shared a tiny bedroom that barely had enough space for twin beds, a dresser, and the nightstand Daddy made in high school shop class. Sometimes sharing a room was annoying, but mostly it was okay. I found my favorite nightgown in the top dresser drawer, pulled it over my head, and dropped my dirty clothes in a heap on the floor at the foot of my bed. I'd pick them up tomorrow. As I climbed into bed, Lucky was already waiting for me, his head on my pillow like a human instead of a dog. Abby made a faint noise and rolled onto her back. The fan oscillated back and forth, pushing a breeze through our bedroom that lifted and moved wisps of her dark hair. The blinds behind our pink ruffled curtain tapped against the pane. Outside, trucks on the nearby interstate hummed, driving someplace else. Thunder rumbled. Rain would come before morning. While Abby slept and the house was dark and silent, I struggled to quiet the ideas swirling in my head. Sometimes my thoughts were silly and amounted to nothing, like why I favored strawberry ice cream over chocolate. But I often wondered about bottomless things, like what happened when old people died, or why I was born to Lee and Ann Abbott instead of Elvis and Priscilla Presley. Last week, I heard Mama tell her best friend Maggie about some man who jumped from the Memphis Bridge into the Mississippi River. His body was never found. I haven't been able to erase the picture from my mind, especially at night. I imagine that man's dead body floating around all bloated and exaggerated in the Gulf of Mexico. Things don't just disappear. In our corner of Arkansas, the Mississippi River provided the only nearby place of interest. It was our very own natural wonder, the spot we took out-of-town guests. "Let's go look at the river," Mama had said to her college roommate when she visited in October. We drove behind the levee at Savage Crossing, parked near the concrete embankment used for backing fishing boats into the river, and watched the muddy water roil by. When a barge moved past, Mama's friend took a picture with her camera and seemed impressed. Everyone always was. Last summer, Nana and Papa Pete mailed Abby and me a postcard from St. Louis. I wondered what the Mississippi River looked like from the top of the St. Louis Arch. Sometimes a change of perspective made the world more interesting. Savage Crossing could have used an arch overlooking its river port, or maybe a lookout tower for kids to climb and to toss paper airplanes from. As I lay motionless, I stared at the dark space above my bed until I floated through the ceiling and into the black sky. I imagined the view of our farmhouse from high above, the rock chimney, the back porch, a good supply of shade trees, and the yard filled with more clover than grass. Surrounding our house, rows of cottons spread to the ditch bank at the far edge of our property. We lived in the Delta, also known as the middle of nowhere, where dirt roads divided farmland like sections of an old quilt, and most every bend in the road had a name. Our house was only 2 miles from Cottonwood Corner, an exit on the interstate, a place where travelers gassed up cars and maybe bought a cup of coffee or used the bathroom. That was it. The only semi-exciting thing that ever happened occurred the first Friday of the month, when the old building next to the gas station became the site of a live auction, selling mostly junk. Not that an auction was all that exciting. A crack of lightning flashed and brightened the bedroom. Lucky moved to the foot of my bed, circling and circling, before curling into a knot at my feet. I gave some thought to my upcoming birthday on August 21st. Even though it sounded like a long time away, it wasn't. Summer days always went by faster than school days, so I knew my birthday would come quickly. I lay tree trunk still and tried to imagine being 10, feeling older and different. 10 would be better than 9. It had to be. Double digits stood for something. I was sure of it. Every year, just before my big day, Mama would retell the story of my birth, like it was as interesting as baby Jesus' manger tale. On a steamy morning, 7 days past my due date, Dr. Fairley tugged me from Mama's stomach with stainless steel forceps. I knew it was true because he left a pale scar on my lower back that turned bright white every time I cried or stayed out in the sun too long. I considered that birthmark proof I had never wished to be born into my crazy family. From the very beginning, my life was tainted. Mama saw to that by giving me a long, ridiculous name, Gracie Lee Abbott. 4 names instead of 3, which right away set me on a complicated path. And Eudora? I had never heard such an ugly name, even considering all the strange names in the Old Testament. I spent years trying to decipher a reason for my horrid name. I had studied my baby pictures and knew I had been cute, so that couldn't have been it. My cheeks glowed rosy, and my pale blonde hair made a perfect curl on top, like the Gerber baby whose face was plastered on rice cereal boxes at the grocery store. When I eventually asked Mama about my long name, she gave me an equally long explanation. Grace, because I was born on a Tuesday morning, and Tuesday's child was full of grace, whatever that meant. Lee, because that was Daddy's first name, and Eudora, after his favorite author Eudora Welty. No matter how famous an author she might have been, I thought Eudora was a terrible baby girl name. Daddy thought otherwise. He kept a book of Eudora Welty short stories on his bedside table next to the Vicks Vapor-Rub. His favorite, Death of a Traveling Salesman, was marked with a Cardinals baseball ticket stub. What a gloomy-sounding story. 2 years, 9 months, and 7 days later, when the stork brought another baby to our house, Mama wised up and gave my sister a normal name, Abigail Ann, after herself and Nana. Abby's chubby cheeks and naturally pouty lips fascinated everyone. She doesn't look anything like Gracie. I just want to eat her up. That's what Mama's friend Maggie said when she brought over a vase of pink carnations and a silver rattle, and then left with half a cup of oleo. Maggie never left our house without borrowing Mama's food. Most everyone called me Grace or Gracie Lee, except on the first day of school, when teachers insisted on calling students by their God-given names. Even though school had just let out for summer break, I was already worrying about the fall. That was how my mind worked. I worried about things so far in advance of the bad that I never enjoyed the good. Nana said I was an old soul like her. Mama always told me not to stew so much about silly things, but believe me, when kids knew your name was Eudora, there was plenty to worry about at Savage Crossing Elementary School. Chapter 2. Some days felt different right from the start, as though something special had been planned, but my brain wasn't awake enough to remember exactly what. Other than the hum of the fan, the house lay still and quiet. Even the blackbirds had forgotten their early crowing. I stood on my pillow, stretched my arms to grip the window ledge above my bed, and hoisted myself onto the edge of my iron headboard. Balancing on tiptoes, I pushed aside the shade and peeked outside the high, narrow window. From house to horizon, mucky water covered Daddy's cotton crop, a crop that had only just sprouted from the soil. The ditches, which normally divided fields into neat squares, had completely disappeared beneath a brown sea. Next to our playhouse, my favorite willow tree looked squatty, with a partially submerged trunk and weeping branches that skimmed the water. "Oh my God! Abby, wake up! There's a lake!" Abby scrambled from underneath her quilt and joined me, her fat toes gripping the rim of the headboard. She was barely able to peer above the window ledge. "Oh, wow!" she gasped as her eyes scanned from left to right. "Let's go swimming, Gracie!" Tossing our matching nightgowns to the floor, we dressed in cutoffs and t-shirts, the ones we were allowed to wear when we played in the mud. I pulled my hair back into a long ponytail to keep it out of my face, and then helped my sister with her hair. Hers was tricky. She had a wad of bubble gum matted in the curls near her ear, but I worked around it, raking strands up and over the sticky part and securing it with a pink plastic hairband, the same color as the gum. Mama would have to deal with that later. I grabbed Barbie and Ken, knowing they would enjoy a swim too. Ken got a neat boat last Christmas, but so far, the only water it had seen was in the boring bathtub. "Why is Ken naked?" Abby asked. I had stripped him of his fancy suit and placed him at the helm of his boat. "I don't want his good clothes to get stained in the muddy water." Barbie had a red bathing suit, but Ken only had work clothes and a tuxedo for fancy affairs. What did it matter anyway? Ken didn't have real boy parts. I knew all about those weird boy parts because my friend Janice accidentally found a picture of Michelangelo's naked David statue in the World Book Encyclopedia. Sometimes interesting things like that happened when nothing much was expected from the day. The first time we saw it, we gawked and whispered. I felt dirty and bad, but later decided if the picture was in the encyclopedia, it must have been educational, and that was okay, even encouraged. Plus, the naked statue was considered art by some. From then on, each time we went to the library, we sneaked looks at his thing, while Mrs. Penny, the school librarian, tried to keep the boys quiet. Once Abby and I dressed and gathered up Barbie and Ken, we tiptoed down the hallway, careful not to wake Mama and Daddy. "Step exactly where I step, Abby," I whispered. The worn hardwood floors creaked in certain places, especially across the span of flooring between the bedrooms. Lucky darted past us, but I counted my footsteps, which helped me remember where to place my feet. Surprisingly, Abby did as instructed, and we pushed open the back door, undetected. On a regular day, our backyard appeared level, but I had come to realize nothing was what it appeared. Instead, the ground was uneven, filled with dips and peaks, and a low spot in the center where rainwater pooled. The same held true for the cotton fields in our county. When I drove my bicycle on the road in front of our house, the land in every direction looked flat enough to walk between 2 rows of cotton and off the edge of the planet. Living in the Mississippi Delta made it hard to believe the earth was round. As I stepped off the back patio into cold water, the grass felt strange and squishy between my bare toes. My feet sank into the spongy earth, and my ankles disappeared beneath coffee-colored water. Lucky forged ahead, swimming fast, as though I had thrown something for him to fetch. He held his head high above the water, but the black and tan splotches on his back were barely visible. Abby giggled as we held hands and waded toward the middle of the backyard, the lowest spot behind the house. Water reached the edge of my shorts and almost to Abby's waist. To the far right, Daddy's truck sat parked atop a gravel driveway higher than the yard. Water reached the top of his truck tires and lapped at the bark of the nearby plum tree. I squeezed my eyes tight, flopped down, dunked my head, and reappeared after swimming underwater a few strokes. The water felt gritty and thick, completely different from the clean, cold water at the swimming pool in town, or even the water at Lake Norfolk, where Nana and Papa had a fishing cabin. Plunging under again, I swam straight, keeping my body taut and holding my breath as long as possible. I was Jane, swimming with Tarzan in a hippo-infested African river. Surfacing, I smeared the water from around my eyes. Abby made motorboat sounds while pulling Barbie and Ken in my muddy wake. She showed no concern for the menacing crocodiles lurking all around. Our playhouse stood on higher ground in the back corner of the yard, near a row of cherry trees. Daddy and his farmhands built the small house last winter, when there wasn't much farm work to do.
"They're on the payroll. I may as well put them to work,"
Daddy had said. Mama moved most of our games and toys into the playhouse, so our bedroom would stay neater. But I wouldn't let her move Barbie. Barbie and her friends lived inside the real house, with us. Pushing open the door, I saw that everything remained as we had left it. Our pink plastic cups and saucers were set out on the kitchen table, yesterday's undisturbed tea party. "Gracie, let's make a raft!" Sometimes Abby had good ideas. Our wooden toy box lid was the perfect size to support both of us lying flat on our bellies. Plus, it floated, which was a raft requirement. We kicked and paddled around the yard, exploring the water and grabbing sticks that we found drifting around like water moccasins. Lucky found a stick, too. He swam with it in his mouth until he discovered a grassy spot near the house. Then he lay with it between his paws and chewed it like a bone. I liked how some days turned out to be okay and good, days worth remembering for a long time. "Abby Grace, get in the house this minute!" Mama screeched from the back door, blending our names together as she was prone to do when she became overly excited. Along the sides of Mama's face, bobby pins held her dark, twisty curls in place, but the top of her hair was crazy messy, like she had been turning somersaults in her sleep. She wore gold house slippers that turned up at the toes like genie shoes, and her pale blue robe was wrapped tight at her slender waist. I felt pretty sure Mama was naked underneath, because she didn't sleep in pajamas. I discovered that late one night after rushing into her bedroom when something scary moved underneath my bed. I never made that mistake again. "Mama, look at all this water! Isn't it cool?" I said. Abby and I splashed toward her, riding our toy box raft and making waves with our cupped fingers. Lucky raced toward her and jumped up, nearly getting her bathrobe muddy. She shoved him away just in time. "Don't you dare let Daddy hear you say that! His cotton is floating down the Mississippi River!" She slammed the door, rattling the window pane. Hundreds of blackbirds rose from the willow in one dazzling cloud, flying over the playhouse before changing direction and swarming over the pump house on the opposite side of our yard. Once Mama went back inside, they returned to the same willow branches. Lucky barked and barked and barked. I thought he was making up for not having noticed them before. Abby and I kept right on playing in the water until Mama made us come inside and wash our hair. Daddy wasn't always a farmer. Before I knew him, he was a regular person who played on the football team at Savage Crossing High School and liked to fish for trout at White River. Mama has a whole photo album with pictures of him smiling and looking happy, back when he wore white t-shirts with the sleeves rolled up. Mama said they had been childhood sweethearts since he stole her heart the first day she saw him at Savage Crossing Junior High. Now that he was a grouch, I had a hard time picturing them young or being mushy in love. Most of the time, I didn't know why she put up with Daddy. I was never getting married, that was for sure. Barbie got the last good man. One thing I could say about Daddy is that he had always been a hard worker and smart, too. As a kid, he never missed a day of school, and he made perfect grades in both high school and college. Before I was born, Daddy worked as an accountant in town. Mama said he wore a suit to work and even carried a leather briefcase. I often wondered how life would have turned out if Daddy had kept his desk job instead of becoming a farmer. Maybe he wouldn't have gotten sick anyway. The word sick has lots of different meanings. There is throwing up sick, like the time I had the flu. Dr. Fairley poked a stick down my throat and gave me a shot in my rear end. There was also sick and tired, like when Abby and I grated on Mama's nerves, whining or begging to go to Sterling's. And then there was Daddy's kind of sick, from drinking too much beer and whiskey. Mama believed it really was a sickness, but I thought it was a lame excuse for pure meanness. Nana said our bodies were temples, and if Daddy didn't stop poisoning his, one of these days it would kill him. I was waiting for that time, which made me feel a little sick inside. But not like flu sick, more like I did something bad sick. After Mama washed my hair and rolled it in pink brush curlers, I lay back in the tub with the nape of my neck on a towel rolled as a pillow. I stared at my flat chest. There was no change from yesterday. My friend Janice started wearing a training bra last month, even though she was as flat as me. Her mother was cool that way. Plus, since she had 2 older sisters, she always did things earlier than I did. My 13-year-old cousin, Candy, who lived with Mama Pearl, had been wearing a bra forever. She told me the whole growing titties thing happened fast, overnight even. One day she was as flat as a piece of plywood, and the next day, there they were, big and round enough that Mama Pearl took her to Sterling's to buy a 3-pack of real bras, skipping the training kind altogether. Maybe tomorrow, I thought. The curlers poked my head and made my scalp itch, but Mama said we girls had to suffer to be beautiful. Church hair, as she called it, should be shiny and bouncy and certainly squeaky clean. The agony seemed pointless to me, since there was no one to impress at Boone Chapel. Plus, no matter how long the curler stayed in my hair, it still went dull and stringy before Brother Brown finished preaching. The worst part of the hair washing routine was after Mama rolled our hair, Abby and I couldn't play outside or do anything rowdy. Instead, we passed the time playing jacks on the kitchen floor and coloring in our bedroom. Just before lunch, Mama turned on the television so we could all watch the weather, in case Daddy quizzed us. Sometimes he did that. Except in the coldest, deadest time of winter when nothing was growing, Daddy rarely took a day off. And even in winter, he found jobs to do like work on his equipment or unstop a ditch where the water wouldn't drain. Rain or shine, he drove to each of his fields at least twice a day to see what had changed since the last trip over. Since our land was spread around the county, a cotton field here, a soybean field over by town, a wheat field by the levee, there was always something going on. A section needed plowing, a crop had bugs chomping on it, a field, like the one behind our house, got too much rain. Papa Pete said buying land scattered around the area helped spread the risk of farming. To me, it spread the driving time.
"What's for lunch?"
Daddy asked as he walked in the door, tracking mud all over Mama's clean kitchen floor. She stared at the mess but didn't say anything. Daddy sat in his regular chair closest to the icebox and opened the newspaper to the business and farm section. Janice thought he was the handsomest man around. He had straight teeth and wasn't fat anywhere that I could see. And he had plenty of brown hair, unlike Janice's dad, who had a slick, shiny head. I reckon those were all positive traits. "Soup and sandwiches," Mama said, placing his plate in front of him. Mama's dishes were always carefully arranged, even plain grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles and tomato soup from a can. Daddy scooped up the crackers circling his soup bowl, squeezed them in the palm of his hand, and dumped them on top of his soup. The crumbs mounded like an anthill and didn't sink. With a stir of his spoon, his soup became thick and goopy, and no longer watery. He ate with deliberate motions, moving one heaping spoonful at a time to his mouth, slow and steady, his throat shifting with each swallow.
"I'll have to replant most of the cotton, at least here around the house," he grumbled. "It'll cost a fortune."
For the first time, I noticed a few gray hairs scattered in his dark sideburns. "I'm so sorry, Lee," Mama said as she untied her apron, hung it on the back of her chair, and sat down. "But maybe not. Maybe it's not as bad as you think." And that was all it took to rile him. The wrong word or tone of voice, a certain facial expression. Daddy dropped his spoon into his bowl and stared at her. Mama touched his wrist right above his watch, but he yanked back his arm. She began apologizing over and over. For what? I had no idea. I didn't think she knew either.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?